This is Stella Tsantekidou from Left on Red Media, and this is Bread and Roses, the podcast for the intellectually and aesthetically curious. Today, I have with me Andy Twelves. He's a media strategist and a daily Express columnist, and he will be talking to me about the difference between right-wing growth and left-wing growth. Hello, Andy.
Hello, good evening, good afternoon, good morning.
Good afternoon. So, you are a media strategist and a columnist for the Daily Express.
Yeah, for my sins.
For your sins. I read a piece you wrote for the Daily Express, which was very controversial. You were talking about looking for growth, and you were being very unkind about them.
Yeah, very unkind, very unkind. I had a few comments on Twitter and on a few group chats. It didn't go down very well.
Yeah, so looking for growth, it's quickly to do a recap of what they are. They are this campaigning group that was set up by Lawrence Newport, who was the XL bully campaigner, the one who banned them, not to pro them. And it's been orchestrated by Dominic Cumming. There are whispers about how much of that is Dominic Cummings, how much is his involvement. I don't want to not give credit, of course, to the Newport brothers, because...
And Joe Reeve, of course. Joe Reeve.
Yes, because they are doing the work. For all I know, Dominic Cummings could have just been having coffees with them, and that's it. Yeah. So, but I went to their summit on a couple of weeks ago.
Sadly, they didn't give me a ticket. I didn't make it off the wait list for that one.
You said they
shockingly.
They didn't give you a ticket. I mean, you know what though? Did you sign up early on?
Honestly, I think I might have done. I signed up.
Or were you late? Because
I was probably late. Really, I saw they had a huge wait list, so it's
maybe they had a wait list. Yeah, maybe they didn't do it on purpose. I don't know. We'll see. Because I went there. It was mostly men. For the first hour, I was one of 10 women. But there were a lot of the people that go to the places that we usually meet as well. The sort of techno-optimist, pro-growth types, not your usual Westminster. There were, of course, a lot of the usual Westminster. There were a lot of the Tories that you usually see in these places. And obviously we made an effort from the Labour Party. We also like to go because, they cover a lot of the issues that we are very interested in. So housing, planning reform, nuclear energy is very fashionable among our tribe lately. So tell me, what do you make of them? Why were you mean to them on your column?
It was in my blog as well. I did a double whammy on it. It was awful. But no one reads my blog. A lot of people read the Daily Express, so I suppose that was the worst one. I've been to two of their events. I went to their launch event and I went to their Civic Future LFG event at this lovely little gastro pub.
I was in that as well.
Yeah, and it kind of struck me how few women there were, how few northern or just non-London and non-American accents. There's a lot of kind of the whole Bay Area fintech bro culture there. A lot of the kind of people who hang out in the city of London and all have a startup based on daddy's money. They'll never see kind of pre-seed funding. But it's true. And I kind of found when I was there, they were kind of talking about kind of managed decline, about kind of the lack of prosperity in this country, as if they'd only just discovered it, as if, since Keir Starmer coming in 9 months ago had been the catalyst for it. Not that we have had managed decline in this country for the better part of 40 years, certainly in the last 15. And it kind of just didn't sit right with me. And they've picked up a lot of traction because, Lawrence Newport has done a lot of stuff with the XL Bullies, like you said. So the media know who he is. He's kind of one of these SW1 darlings. I think it was the Times called him that. And, he's picking up a lot of media credit, which is fair play to him and fair play to his comms. And I just think with their campaigning points and a lot of the stuff they're putting out, they're doing more harm than good to kind of growth campaigning for normal people. Because all the stuff they campaign for is quite abstract. It's like kind of what the government are doing. The comms are just abstract. Why does Bob from Barnsley, who's a binman, care about small modular reactors? How is that going to help him? How is that going to increase his wages? How is that going to, take his bills down? Nobody's explaining that to him. And kind of that's one of my main criticisms with LFG. It's just so abstract. Have you seen
their bill? Do you like their bill?
No, it's awful.
So you know what? I'll tell you what about the bill. So for one, I think the fact that they're doing a bill is I think it goes against what you just said, which is that they're being very generic and all of that, because look, they've done a bill. It's right there. This is what they're asking for. What I would say about the bill is that I was a bit surprised when they said, oh, we're going to submit this to Rachel Reeves and she will have no choice but to accept it because it's right there. We've done the work for her. And I was like, this is not how parliamentary democracies work.
Yeah.
I'm afraid.
Yeah.
But it was, the Dominic Cumming's argument of you can just do things.
Yeah. Well, you can't just do things because like the bill was just poorly written. It didn't, if you sent that into the parliamentary desk for submission, they would reject it.
The clerk would come back.
Yeah,
and
the clerk
say,
would go, "What is this? This is a mess." Do you know what I mean? And also, one of the things I found a bit distasteful at LFG was that they claimed success in the planning infrastructure bill. I mean, the planning infrastructure white paper was written, months before they were even founded. So I think it's a bit in poor taste to claim victory that they've copied the priority infrastructure bill that LFG wrote, that they copied it from that. So it's kind of, I just thought they're just weird posh boys who are a bit bored because the Tories are in opposition now. It just weirds me out. I just don't like the vibe.
I don't have a problem with posh boys, just to put it out there, and not that it's not already public knowledge from my own Substack as well. But what I would say is, I'm not sure, as someone who has worked in the charity sector and on campaigns trying to convince a hostile government, as in, I've always worked for social justice type campaigns, social welfare type campaigns, and the government was a conservative government for the last 15 years. And the thing that we always knew, the first rule of campaigning is you have to make the government look good, and you have to make it look like it was their idea, a little bit like you have to be like a very savvy wife, The husband is the head and the wife is the neck. That's from my big fat Greek wedding. If you haven't watched it, great movie. And I feel like they're missing out that point because they are also looking after their own marketing. And their own image, and they've been doing it really well. They've gotten glowing write-ups in the Times, obviously because they go and talk to, Sebastian Payne or whoever else was writing a column about them.
Well, maybe Seb's hoping for a safe seat under the Startup Party when that founds. Maybe maybe Seb Payne will be chasing that.
The coalition of the chaos/disruption, whatever that Dominic Cumming has been writing in his blog. He said that. In the only place where I found where he says explicitly like that basically looking for growth is the predecessor to the Startup Party is on this podcast he did with Chris Williamson, Modern Wisdom, back in the summer, where he said, Chris asked him whether he's planning to have to start to launch a new party, and he said, no, at the moment I'm looking for funders and for staff to start something like a campaign, not a think tank, not a political party, but a very exciting campaign to attract new talent and motivated people who are tired with stagnation. And then what you have is you completely batter Kemi Badenoch in the local elections. He's been calling everybody to vote for reform. And then you have a changing of the guards in the Conservative Party, and then in the elections, you have a coalition of reform conservatives and whatever looking for growth becomes, and that's how you break up the Starmer coalition. But having said that, to be fair, Andy, and let's be fair here, there were at the Looking for Growth Summit, there were a lot of people who are non-partisan, who are policy experts, who I regularly talk to because I respect them for their policy expertise and the fact that they're not going to just blast propaganda at me.
Yeah, of course.
And I do appreciate the fact that, there are spaces where we can do that. So that is a positive thing, and we should commend them for the hard work they're putting into doing organizing.
Of course.
Yes.
And, at the base of it, I'm a messaging guy. I'm not a policy guy. Comms is kind of the stuff that I work on. And for me, like I said, the LFG, like even if their policies, were fantastic, they were amazing, they were cutting edge, the delivery of it's just so abstract. Do you know what I mean? It's breaking through to crowds that they're already popular in. With the kind of techno-optimists in Westminster, in the Newspeak houses, in the Future houses. Do you know what I mean? That kind of bizarre triangle between East London, City of London, and Westminster. I just don't see it cutting through to swing voters. And
so tell me why. Tell me. You wrote a post on your Substack, which deserves more attention, by the way.
Thank you.
In which you said that Westminster is getting the growth messaging completely wrong.
Yeah.
Tell me why.
Well, I think it kind of goes down to, well, what is growth? Obviously, the left-wing versus right-wing growth question is capital versus people. The Tories saw growth as GDP ticking up, and not really caring about where it comes from. If it's hedge funds raking it in or whether it's, landlords squeezing their tenants, as long as the GDP is ticking up slightly, they don't care. Whereas Labour, when they're not pretending to be Tory light and having some bizarre economic measures for a Labour government, they generally care more about people. They care about kind of the well-being economy, making sure that there's dignity in growth, that stuff is coming from investment in infrastructure in kind of regional communities rather than just hoping that it ticks up. And I think maybe this is Matthew Doyle, who's just left the director of comms in Number 10. Maybe we'll be seeing a different comms direction now James Lyon is in charge. But I just see it as far too abstract. They're throwing up these big graphs. They're showing, these lovely numbers, and they're great. But most people don't care about numbers. If you go to your average swing voter, the kind of person who would have backed Arthur Scargill in the miners' strike in 84, 85, but then also would have backed Farage and the Leave coalition in 2016 in the EU referendum, they don't really care about numbers. They don't wake up and go, oh, let's check the British GDP today. When the budget happens, they're not checking in, seeing what the OBR is saying. They're caring, are my wages going to go up or down? Are my bills going to go up or down? And what's my kid's future like? And I think we need to kind of remove the abstract messaging around growth and bring it to the personal. Instead of having kind of ministers who have been, prepped by excellent press teams and fed the lines by the Treasury and the Number 10 spin machine, the Labour Party should be using its extensive trade union network to find real people outside of the M25 or even within the M25, honestly. In Birmingham, for example, there's the bin strike. I think a 20-second video of a binman who's on strike going, this growth agenda, building more small modular reactors, building more roads, building more whatever, is going to make my wages better. It's going to make my, family life easier. It's going to bring down my rent. It's going to bring down my bills. I think that's what will cut through rather than going, oh, well, actually, statistically speaking, GDP will go up by 0.2. I think we need to remove the abstract from it and kind of bring it back to the personal. I think it's a waste of the trade union network and the massive labour movement that we have behind our party to not be doing that.
Have you looked into what's going on with the binmen in Birmingham? Is it true that basically the reason why there is this blockage is because they were being downgraded, and some of them their pays they were having pay cuts?
Yeah, so true? They were removing certain so there were specialisms within it, particularly around recycling and fly tipping collection, and they were removing the specialisms from that role, which will see about 150 workers lose £8,000 from their pay packet a year each, 8,000 each, which is
insane.
A ridiculous amount. So this kind of action from Unite the Union, who run the bin workers in Birmingham, I completely back it. It's ridiculous that a Labour council would even be considering, stripping working class people of that kind of money. But I suppose it does go back to the kind of Tory crisis of not funding local government properly.
Yeah, literally.
Somehow it always gets back to the Tories.
40%, yeah. But there was also on the same day headlines in the Times about I can't remember the number now, but how many people working for councils have paychecks over 100k?
Yeah,
which was
But binmen aren't one of them. They're
we're doing one of the most vital services, which I
mean, they're clearly worth that extra £8,000 because the impact they've had when they've striked. So I think you can quite see the value of
talking about concrete, real life examples. Yeah,
absolutely.
So tell me, what is? So I'll tell you what I've heard from other left-wing people, why they don't like things like the Foundation's essay by Sam Bowman, and I can't remember the name of the others, I'm really sorry, but it was 3 authors, and Looking for Growth and all of these kind of pro-growth influencers that are popping up now, is that they are pretending to be non-partisan. Mm-hmm. They are saying they are non-partisan. And frankly, honestly, I do believe that they are non-partisan, a lot of them, in the sense that they don't care about the Conservative Party.
Yeah, they're not backed by the Tories.
They don't care about they could, like, the Conservative Party could completely go bust tomorrow, and a lot of them would probably be happy because they blame the Conservatives, like everyone does, for where the country has been going for the last 15 years. But they very obviously are on the right. They very obviously, their politics, whether they express them in a way that is party political, are right-wing, libertarian, free market politics. And what a lot of people, policy people tell me is that when you drill down to it, eventually there will need to be difficult decisions will need to be taken. And you've written in your blogs before that, and in your column in the Daily Express, that we talk about growth and it's all about the fancy new shiny stuff like AI, data centers in Cambridge and all of that. And innovation and research is very important, and I don't want to dunk on that. But you have also talked about, we need to reindustrialize as a country. We need to bring back industry. And I think this is where the small modular reactors would come into place, because at the moment we have a big problem with energy in the UK, because energy is very expensive and it's not very stable. And we need to do something about our energy supply and our energy prices if we want to reindustrialize to any extent, if that is possible. Do you think that's possible?
Yeah, I think the green economy is coming. Realistically, no matter weather reform, win a landslide, they say they're going to cut net zero. Realistically, they won't be able to, because the industrial kind of complex will be already running by that stage. It's been going for about 10 years now. It'll keep on going. I think we should be taking the lead on the green economy and in bringing industry back to the towns in the Midlands and the northwest and northeast and Wales that were stolen away by Thatcher's government and weren't replaced by anyone in the last 40 years. And I think, I do commend LFG on their vision, if nothing else. There's no one really, Foundations by Sam Bowman, he worked at the Adam Smith Institute, he's a right-wing guy. LFG, they're right-wing. I criticise them until the cows come home, but at least they've got vision. And I do appreciate that about them, that at least they're opening the debate up for people like us on the left to go, oh, no, we should probably be doing something like that with us. And I think the left do need to have that vision. And I think part of that's down to the trade unions, because, the TUC represents, 5.5 million workers in this country. A lot of them will be replaced by AI or at least lose part of their jobs because of the artificial intelligence revolution. They should be consulting with them to make sure that their jobs are protected and that there are new jobs that are kind of future-proof.
Yes, I've been thinking about the same, and I want to see the left reclaiming the growth agenda and reclaiming it with our priorities. Yeah. And there will be times when we will be able to work with people across the political spectrum where our interests are the same. But I do think values matter, because in politics, at the end of the day, it's all about priorities. And when you have to make hard choices, you need to have people at the helm who are going to prioritize the social welfare and well-being of our communities as a whole, and not just, as you say, the numbers and the GDP and just the people at the top 10%, those who already have the fancy degrees and who would be doing very well in any kind of economy and are just going to be doing that much better here. Because we're always hearing about this pie and how it's not about how you divide the pie, but about growing the pie for everyone. Well, that is very easy for someone to say when inequality has been massively increasing, and there are people who have been gaining from the popular immiseration of the working and the middle classes.
100%. I think it's not just about growing the pie. We should be spreading the pie reasonably equally so everyone has a chance to eat it. I think there's been a lot of discourse about inequality over the last 15 to 20 years, primarily from the Tories, but also from part of that Blair estate of the early 2000s, that it's all about opportunity, and that if people just work harder or if they upskill or do whatever, then they'll succeed. That's not necessarily true at all. Social mobility, I think, is a con. I don't believe in it, to be honest. I think in this day and age, it's extremely hard to go from, if you grow up working class in this country, you'll probably not be able to afford university. And if you do, you'll be taxed to the high heavens until you're old. You probably don't have the educational institutions at the primary and secondary level to support you to get to a decent enough university where you'll be able to use your degree. I think, in this day and age, social mobility is dead.
What do you think about the Americans? Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson recently published their book, Abundance, and everyone is talking about the abundance agenda. And in the book, Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson say, we don't want this to be an agenda. We don't want this to be a checklist of items. Obviously, they're talking about all of the things that we are talking in the UK, housing reform, planning reform, energy, innovation and research, deployment, which I think is very important, how we already have a lot of amazing ideas, but how you actually put them into practice and how you scale is a whole other question. And they are saying how we need to have a new world order. And when you have the opportunity to have a new world order, you look at what came before. So Marx and Engels, for example, they said capitalism was much better than what came before it, feudalism.
Sure.
Capitalism was better, it produced more, it made everyone's living standards were raised. But now we've reached stagnation again, because the same things that feudalism was blocking production and innovation, and we've reached that stage with capitalism now as well. We see that profiteering is actually blocking innovation and moving towards our goals, because unless you make well-being profitable, then private investors are just not interested in investing in it. Yeah. So we need a new world order. What do you think about the abundance, the idea of abundance?
Yeah, I haven't read the book yet, but I've read a lot of the reviews and a lot of the notes on it. And I think, again, it's sort of like Foundations. We need a left-wing version. With abundance, we need a British version, almost. And I think this is one of the problems that the Labour government have been having. You said about the system is broken fundamentally. The world financial system, the way that we innovate, the way that we build is broken. I think particularly, actually, there was an announcement from Welsh Labour, who are in government in Wales, talking about how they're going to manage the decline of Tata Steel in Port Talbot. I think a lot of people see this Labour government as just managing the decline and just making sure that it slowly edges rather than building. I think that's where some of their comms is going wrong. I think really, instead of just managing the decline, they need to be holding to those who are blocking and creating the decline to power. Going after companies that really do, take the mickey with public money. Thames Water, a lot of the rail providers. I think they need to be having a go at those kind of people. They need to be having a go at the energy companies that are, achieving record profits, but people are also paying record bills. And I think at the end of the day, they need to, stop just trying to manage the decline, actually do something about the people who are creating the decline.
There was this amazing statistics from Andrew O'Brien from the Council for National Resilience, who calculated that in 1975, when Thatcher became Tory leader, the country was spending around 19 billion a year in today's prices on support for nationalized industries and employment programs. Today, we are spending 41 billion on unemployment assistance alone.
Yeah.
And a lot of this unemployment assistance, of course, goes straight into the communities that Thatcher completely decimated.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think at the end of the day, a lot of people, like where I grew up in one of these towns, and a lot of people see it easier just being on unemployment or trying to get long-term sickness, because the kind of getting on to, the kind of job-centered, job-seeking programs, the kind of criticisms are so punitive that you can't live. I was reading, I think it was The Guardian or The Mirror, it was one of the left-wing papers, about a guy in Grimsby who, just stayed on long-term sickness instead of going job-seeking because the damages were so punitive. If you missed a phone call, for example, you just wouldn't be able to pay the bills because they just cut your allowance. So I think there does need to be a complete restructuring that makes it easier and much more. We need to actually get incentives for people to get back to work. And part of that is, investing in industries that will create jobs and kind of pointing out short-term and long-term benefits from the growth agenda, not just, GDP will tick up. Gary from Grimsby, you're going to have a job. It's going to be much better paid and you're going to have a much better life than you would do on long-term sickness or on, on the dole or whatever. And I think there needs to be a serious comms reprogramming to make those incentives clear.
Where are you from?
Mansfield, so East Midlands.
So you have a background, you have a union background.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things you write about the most in union politics.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you. I believe unions are extremely important and we need to rejuvenate them. And we are paying for the fact that unions have been decimated over the years with really bad policy that doesn't benefit and doesn't prioritize workers. But there are times when unions will back policies that I personally disagree with, and other people on the left disagree with. Unions will want to do something that will seem quite destructive for the economy of the whole country, and which ultimately will not benefit the majority of people in the country.
Sure.
How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, one of the biggest disputes in the trade union movement has been the winter fuel allowance with pensioners. Obviously, Sharon Graham from Unite, the General Secretary of Unite, which is, I think, the second or third largest union in the country, she's taken a big stand against Keir Starmer's winter fuel allowance kind of chopping. But then the GMB, who are kind of Keir's union in the party at the minute, have kind of stood against it, and GMB and Unite share a lot of industries, and that's caused a lot of trouble with the day-to-day politics and kind of industrial negotiations in the country. I think it's hard to paint the union movement as one thing, because every union has its own history and its own internal politics and its own unique identity. Even GMB and Unite, whose members share a lot of the same professions, share a lot of the same ideals, share a lot of the same struggles.
Very different politics.
Very, very different unions. I think a lot of it goes down to purpose. 100 years ago, well, just over, it would have been 1889, so just over 200 years ago. No, not 200 years, 150 years ago almost. There was the new unionism movement led by Ben Tillett on the London Dockers strike, where they unionised general workers for the first time. Before, it was just skilled workers that were being unionised. And I think we need another new unionism movement where we go beyond just those that work in person. I think COVID's helped this along quite a lot. We need to go just beyond those that you can go and speak to in the workplace, those you can go and speak to at the pub after work, after drinks, whatever. We need to be organising online more. The gig economy is rising, and the amount of workers in the gig economy that aren't unionised is higher than any other industry, other than those that are banned from unionising, like the police or whatever. And I think we need to take a step, and the TUC, Trade Union Congress, needs to take a lead on organising in the gig economy, like Six Silverman did in America with the Mechanical Turks, the online Amazon product detailers. There needs to be clear, movements and clear strategies towards unionising workers that will never speak to one another. And whether that's done in Facebook groups, in Discord servers, whether it's, unofficial union organising done just by community groups, there needs to be some form of reconsideration about how we organise as a movement and how, what our actual movement looks like. 100 years ago, we had a clear purpose. There was no health and safety. There were barely any maternity protections, no paternity protections, there was no minimum wage. There were barely any decent working conditions. We've achieved incredible things over the last 100, 150 years and revolutionised the way that working class people, middle class people and upper class people work in this country. And we need to figure out what's next. Whether it is, pushing on menopause privileges, which is an excellent campaign run by the GMB, whether it's protecting the rights to digitally organise. That's a big thing at the moment, that those workers who will never meet each other and are only remote, do unions have the right to organise on their Microsoft Teams servers? We need to be thinking about what the issues are, not of just today, but of tomorrow, 2 years down the line, 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, and really start to make a move towards that now.
Unions and growth,
yes.
Do they go together?
I think, yes, absolutely. I think, the New Deal for working people, that's been the union's big policy push over the last 5 years, certainly since, longer, since Jeremy Corbyn came into the leadership of the Labour Party. It's been a big thing. So I think the new working deal, obviously it's been slimmed down a bit because negotiations have to happen. As government, you've got to appease the city and big business as much as you would the workers. Obviously, the trade unions wouldn't have it that way, but we live in a democracy. I think, looking at protections on payment, protections on workers' rights, day one rights, this kind of stuff, that is objectively going to make people's lives better. They're going to work harder and the economy will grow. If you're getting paid £15 an hour rather than what it is now, 11, is it £11, £9, whatever it is. It depends on your age, I suppose. But, if there is that minimum protection, if we are raising the minimum wage, if we are equalising and raising the apprenticeship wage, then that will, by the Tory definition of growth, that will increase growth. There will be more money passed between hands. There'll be more money spent on the high street, more money spent in business. And by Labour's definition of growth, about community well-being, more people will be better off. And I think the new working deal is absolutely crucial to the growth agenda.
Great. Andy 12, thank you so much.
Thank you.